Forgive us if we're all a little food obsessed. I look around this room and I know that's true of you because you're here in Maine, and even if you're just visiting for the weekend, you can't help but be drawn into the creative food energy and buzz in this part of the world. And that's not just the coffee talking. From the outside, this place may seem cold and forbidding. Those of us who live here know that, in fact, our summers can be hot and intense. But they only last for 2 days, from the end of July to my birthday on August 2nd. And yet Maine is, in every sense, extremely fertile ground and one of the best places to eat that I've ever known. So how can that be? And what do you think is driving this creative food energy? And do you think it's going to blow over? Are we going to tire of our hearth-roasted beans and get back to freeze-dried instant coffee? By now it may seem that with all the media hype and the celebrity chefs, the farms on the rooftops, that we've reached the saturation point. But I don't think so. And in fact, far from coming to the end of this creative food revolution, I think that even now, we're just scratching the surface. Our Puritan ancestors, they weren't exactly known for their cuisine. They were content with overcooked pot roasts because these showed disdain for worldly pleasure. And I've often wondered how this foodie culture could have taken hold so deeply here in New England, the land of sinners in the hands of an angry God. But just as hippies invented sex and drugs back in the 60s, sometime about 10 years ago, their kids invented food. And it had always been around, of course, stored in cans in the back of the refrigerator, but they discovered its creative potential. So where do you think this creativity begins and ends? Is it in the kitchen, or in the supermarket, at the farmer's market? I think it goes much deeper than any of that, and much farther back in time than most of us imagine. And we should give our ancestors their due. We're hardly the first to discover the creative potential of food. In fact, I'd argue that our food system represents the largest creative endeavor in human history. Over the past couple of generations, what we've done, in effect, is to cede control over what we eat to a system that lacks imagination. And while that's brought all kinds of benefits, it's also come at a cost to us. I'm sure I'm far from the only person in this room who believes it's past time to regain control over what we eat. So let me ask you this. Do you know what an apple looks like? And do you know what an apple tastes like? There's a whole world out there beyond our Granny Smiths and our Macs. This past summer in Iowa, I met Dan Bussey, an orchardist and historian who will soon release an encyclopedia of American apples that will describe over 20,000 named varieties. So just think about that for a moment. At one time or another in this country, we grew over 20,000 different kinds of apples. With that sort of diversity, you could eat a different fruit and experience a different flavor every day for more than 50 years. So Dan estimates that roughly 2/3 of these varieties are now extinct, but we still have several thousand in public and private gene banks, and several hundred available to us through commercial nurseries. And this kind of diversity extends to all sorts of foods. Our USDA gene bank system alone holds over 500,000 varieties of foods of all sorts, from wild Peruvian tomatoes to delicate French melons. And our system is just a part of a much larger network of over 1,000 gene banks worldwide that maintain several million different varieties. Well, some foods have more diversity than others. Think tens of thousands of tomatoes or beans or rice, for example. But even the humblest can have sometimes astonishing diversity. Take something like our common beige chickpea, which I find altogether too starchy and bland. Give me some that are green or black or mottled tan or brown. These are so much more beautiful and delicious. So here's the situation. We have this incredible diversity stashed away in gene banks, while for most of us we have access to the same foods day in and day out. And you may wonder how we came to that place. A lot of people ask me that. And the answer has to do with some combination of marketing and consumer preference and efficiency, and then all too often to pure chance. But the bottom line is that the market and mass production demands consistency and uniformity. So don't get me wrong, I'm all for efficiency. We need economy of scale to feed everybody. But there must be some middle ground that can allow greater diversity to flourish. So in my own gardens, I grow all kinds of fruits and vegetables for our home use and for conservation purposes, and to some extent for the market. But in the past few years, I've started to focus especially on apples. That's because of their rich history and their stories, their multiple uses, and because old and forgotten apple trees remain all around us, still in the landscape, remaining to be collected. They're lying hidden in plain sight at the side of country roads and at old farmsteads, and even in the city and the suburbs. And apple and pear trees can live for hundreds of years. I visited a pear tree that was planted in 1630 by the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in Danvers, Massachusetts, Governor John Endicott. It's now considered to be the oldest living cultivated fruit tree in North America, coming up on its 400th anniversary. And in my own travels, I've collected grafted off of trees that are as much as 200 years old, and its fruit is as yet unidentified. Well, John Bunker, who's known all around Maine for his work preserving rare fruits, once set out to find an apple called the Fletcher Sweet. It was known in the historic record up around Lincolnville on Maine's central coast, but it was considered in all probability to be extinct. So he put an ad in the local paper, and this led him eventually to a single response. An old farmer named Clarence Thurlow told him he remembered eating Fletcher Sweet apples as a boy, and he could take them to a tree. So they went out into the woods to a place once known as Fletchertown at the base of Moody Mountain, and there they found this tree. It was nearly dead. It just had a couple of living branches and no fruit, just enough that John Bunker was able to graft off of it, identify the fruit, and find that it did in fact match historic descriptions. Now, a year later, both Clarence Thurlow and that tree had died, so that moment, that window of opportunity to collect the fruit had passed. And today, like many other forgotten regional foods, Fletcher Sweet is making something of a minor comeback, and it'll soon find a permanent home in a 10-acre preservation orchard that's being developed by the Maine Organic Farm and Garden Association up in Unity. The purpose of this orchard is to permanently conserve and protect fruits from all around Maine. Now, another reason I'm passionate about apples is my fascination with cider, and I wish I had some bottles to pass around to all of you right now. This forgotten drink is beginning to make a comeback, but we have a long way to go to explore its potential. Most people still know hard cider through the sweet, fizzy drink that you find in the local pub, but good cider can be so much more complex and nuanced than that. This is why I've planted an experimental orchard of several hundred trees and will be producing my own line of commercial hard cider. The work gives a focus and a meaning to collecting to ensure that the fruits are more than just museum pieces. So it's once a conservation effort and a business. Because right now, too many collectors know little about the foods in their possession, about their horticultural properties and their tastes, whereas food businesses have access to an all too narrow range of raw products. So just think what could happen if these two worlds could connect. We could at once explore the best of the past and breed new foods, develop new foods from this rich diversity. Now, this is already happening to some extent in creative places like Maine, where farmers are working directly with plant breeders and with chefs. But when it comes to the diversity of the foods we eat, we've got a long way to go to reach the saturation point for creative work. We're not even scratching the surface. So I hope we can bring the diversity of our gene banks out of the deep freeze and find ways for it to live again. I have several dozen apple trees of a variety called Harrison, which was once considered the finest variety for hard cider in the New York market. But by the middle of the 20th century, Harrison trees had all been removed, and the variety was considered to be extinct. After many years of searching, historian nurseryman Tom Burford of Virginia at last discovered a single tree remaining in a residential backyard in central New Jersey. I've tasted hard cider from the Harrison apple, and I can tell you that it's like nothing you've ever experienced. It's dark and rich, it's full-bodied, extremely flavorful. So this Harrison cider is, to me, a living fragment of a lost and forgotten art. It's something to preserve and to celebrate. Because we have so much to explore, both old and new. And I hope we can use our newfound appreciation for good food to increase its diversity, and in this, to keep the creative ferment of our food revival going strong. It's a really exciting time for food businesses of all sorts. and for you and for me and everybody who loves to eat. Thanks very much.